if you're going to engineer something like this, you have to prototype it and test it. You don't just build it and it works. You have to go through iterations to get it there.
So you're telling me you don't think that One-Eyed Willie and his gang were, trapped in there just testing all these booby traps? That's not flying for you?
Yeah, they just didn't have time for that. They got to be out here pillaging and raiding. This is not what a pirate does. We're not. It's almost like when the Vikings became farmers. They're like, oh, we're going to settle down. Are you still a Viking at that point?
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? Ahoy, me matey. How you be doing there, Hakeem?
R. I watched the movie. It was rated R.
No, not this one. This one is a family film, I tell ya. It's constantly on the top lists for family films, despite the fact that it's from the long ago time of 1985. Arr.
Oh, Artie, that's the year I graduated high school, R.
And when you be graduating high school, had you seen The Goonies?
I had seen The Goonies a little bit later because I went directly from my high school graduation into boot camp. So, I had movies were scarce. But once I got out of boot camp, then I had access to the dollar movie theater on base, and I watched many a movie.
Goonies being one of them. Well, welcome everyone to Does It Fly, the podcast where we talk about the science and story of your favorite gadgets and gizmos from all kinds of films. Today, as you have figured out, we are talking about the classic adventure action kid-centric movie, The Goonies, directed by Richard Donner, written by Chris Columbus.
And full of gadgets.
So many gadgets. So this is your spoiler alert. If you have not seen this film, and it's possible it may be new to you, especially if you're on the younger side or you're introducing it to someone younger in your life, hit pause, go watch the movie, then come back and join us for the conversation on whatever device you are listening or watching, because there will be spoilers. For those who may not have seen The Goonies in a while, just a quick refresher. This is the story of a ragtag bunch of friends who live in Astoria, Oregon, a sleepy coastal town, and their homes are about to be foreclosed on because of an evil real estate developer who wants to build a fancy golf course. So they go off in search of the legendary treasure from One-Eyed Willie that is supposedly buried somewhere in the town, in the caves and tunnels beneath it. We don't know. That's the story.
Who named that character? But anyway.
And today we're going to specifically be talking about the traps, the many booby traps that are featured throughout the story of The Goonies.
And I will tell you this, when I did see the movie The Goonies, I did not see what I was expecting to see. I thought I was going to see something like Gremlins, right? The Goonies sounds like... You too?
Yeah, so that's so funny that you said that. So I didn't actually see The Goonies for the longest time because I thought it basically was Gremlins. They came out similar era. They totally confused me. So I saw Gremlins, did not see Goonies for a very long time.
Yeah. So that, once you get over that realization that, hey, there's not going to be any funny furry creatures popping out, then you can enjoy the adventure that this is. And, I love these kid coming of age adventures. I had a similar experience in my childhood because I'm Gen X, right? And in Gen X, your parents in the beginning of the day told you, get out. Get out of my house.
So
because
you went on a treasure hunt and you found a pirate ship?
Oh man, we went on so many different hunts. So, part of my childhood was in New Orleans and we have canals. And one time while playing in the woods, we found ourselves a canoe. And, the canals have tunnels. And so we went into the tunnel with the little boat, this is amazing stuff. And then also over the canals in New Orleans, there are these pipe structures, right? They go up at an angle, then they're flat and they go down. Instead of going around, we would walk across those pipes. Now, I did not walk. I would scoot. I would sit on it and scoot across. But, you could have fallen in that canal, right? So you had the same level of danger, or we had a similar level of danger. And the same thing happened when I was a kid in Mississippi. You go into the woods as boys. So we would do things
you come out as men.
Sorry. You go into the woods as boys, you come out as men.
Yeah.
But we would go on we had no purpose. We're just going to go in, and what happens, happens. And sometimes we're swinging on vines. Sometimes we're swimming in the creek, and sometimes we're, tracking animals. We're just doing kid adventures that pop into our minds, right? And I love that about this, right? Because that really, now that we have all of our kids are stuck on social media.
Well, hold on. Wait, I want to actually pause you there, because that's actually when we get to our does it fly for the vibes? That's kind of the heart of what I want to talk about. I think there's a really interesting conversation we can have around what happens when you have a movie like this that was made at a certain time, that when you see it, you relate to the kid characters in the movie. That's where you see yourself. But then you and I are both parents. And here we are X years later rewatching this movie. And what's it like to see this movie through parent eyes? And how do you feel about what the kids do? So let's save that for that. And I'm going to
let's save that.
I'm going to flip it to you for some engineering chit chat to talk to me about the science of booby traps.
Yeah, well, you know what? The booby traps are amazing. And what I love about the way the movie unfolds is they throw to the booby traps without letting you know. Because in the opening sequence, Data, this character Data, he creates essentially a Rube Goldberg machine for the purpose of doing something incredibly simple, which is opening the gate.
Yep, and that is the quintessential definition of a Rube Goldberg machine, right? You have an incredibly complicated contraption, usually made of everyday objects like a bowling ball. In this case, we have a chicken laying an egg to do something simple, and there's usually comedy involved.
That's right. There's usually comedy involved, and it's pretty much almost useless, but it's really doing far more than is necessary, because you could just walk up there and open the gate. But the booby traps in these adventures that these kids go on are Rube Goldberg-like, in the sense that you can, let's just go through them, right? So you have a boulder falling trap, which is a classic, right? We had that in the Indiana Jones movies. That's one of the most famous, iconic scenes. But here...
Well, wait, and I feel like I would be remiss if it did not point out that Data, whom you mentioned, is played by Ki-Hai Kwan, who played Short Round in the Indiana Jones movies. So.
Is that right? Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And Data has never been on the Star Trek Enterprise as far as this particular Data goes, right?
Different data.
That's right. This is a full human Data.
Don't cross the fandoms.
Don't cross the fandom. That's right.
I just referenced another fandom. So, we just got Ghostbusters, Star Trek, and Goonies. And Indiana Jones, all in one.
All in one, man. We are driving fans crazy. So in the boulder falling trap, a tripwire is triggered, and we don't see how it does it, but it somehow makes a blade swing on a pendulum that cuts a rope that releases a lever system and a pulley that lowers smaller rockets. The chain separation occurs and the boulders fall, right? Now, here's the thing about these booby traps. They are in an ancient temple, right? And the idea in general is something that has appeared in many different other movies, like we said, Indiana Jones, for example. And so the first question I would imagine anyone would have is, have those really existed? Are there real booby-trapped tombs in the world, right? So I did a little research. I'm going to pull them tomorrow and pull out my notes. For example, ancient Egypt, known for their tombs and their monuments. What types of booby traps do they have? Well, you don't necessarily have booby traps, but you have tomb security that's meant to last the ages. So you can have misdirection via false passages or hidden chambers that mislead some intruders, right? So you can have decoy entrances. There are so-called stone block traps, right? Where you had large stones or entire ceiling slabs that were rigged to fall when supports were removed or disturbed within the tomb. So,
that
the
sounds
idea
like a booby trap to me.
It is a booby trap. It's
Yeah.
a booby trap. Yeah, yeah. But it's not as elaborate as, tripwire, thing swinging. It's a grave diggers are digging and they disturb a support that
Fair.
causes a thing to fall, right? But also, the ancient Egyptian tombs used psychological traps, right? They had inscriptions that threatened divine punishment. So it's a form of psychological warfare. And it came into the modern era. Remember when Tutankhamun's tomb was found, and there are the stories of all the misfortunes that befell the leader of the expedition and those who were involved. And so let's go to Mesoamerica, the Mayans and Aztecs. So there is steep staircases, collapsing floors, and tight labyrinthian corridors that serve defensive, maybe, or ceremonial purposes. So here's an example of one. There's the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It's discovered rows of hidden burial pits filled with sacrificial remains. And these were meant to be spiritual deterrents. So basically, I'm going to sprinkle dead bodies in here. So when you walk in, you're going to be like, nope, not the place to be.
No, thank you. No, don't want to go there. Mm-mm.
Yeah, and then there's, I hope I say this correct, the Palenque tombs of the Maya. Inside the Temple of the Inscriptions, the tomb of Paco the Great is hidden behind a secret staircase, right? And so that perhaps is a protective measure.
Right.
And then there's the most famous one, and that is the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor in China with the army, right? Allegedly, this tomb had rivers of mercury, crossbows rigged to fire automatically, and booby-trapped doorways, in addition to the army of terracotta soldiers and horses and chariots. And when it's been excavated, or when people did samples, they found that maybe there may be some credibility to these rumors because the rivers of mercury are no longer there, but there's a high level of mercury in the surrounding soil, right? And now in India and Southeast Asia, the Temple Angkor Wat, which is also iconic in Cambodia, or I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Khajuraho in India, they have mechanical snares, right? They have maze-like layouts to slow invaders, and there's narrow checkpoints and elevated sanctums that could function similarly to traps by bottlenecking or exposing intruders. So
based on all of this, I mean, it seems like, these booby traps absolutely are plausible.
Well, here's the issue with these particular booby traps. They are elaborate and things are old in there, right? And so, for example, if you have a rope that's holding something heavy, how is it going to last for thousands of years, right? It's going to decay. It's going to be attacked by the elements as well as microbial life if it's made out of organic materials. And over time, it's going to decay. And by the time you get there, the booby trap is going to be gone, right? So the question is not just, do booby traps exist, but could booby traps this elaborate last for the duration of time necessary to be found in the 20th century and still work?
Yeah, there's a lot of moisture down there too. I would imagine that would affect things as well.
Oh yeah, moisture is gonna degrade things. So it's one of these. It's a measure of scale, right? It's a matter of scale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they go through multiple booby traps. So let me go through a couple more. It's not just the falling boulder.
Yeah.
The pit of spikes, that could last, right? You could have a pit of spikes. That's a common element in war movies as well as these adventure movies.
Yeah.
Then there are how Data saves himself with his pinchers of peril, right? One of his inventions.
Right.
And then there's the bone organ, right? When they're standing there and they're trying to press the right combination and the floor is falling away. You know, is it plausible? We don't know because they don't give us enough information, right? That's the thing about these booby traps in the Goonies. They rarely give us enough information to really look at the components and say, oh, that could last over time and still function. For example, moving parts. Moving parts can seize. This is a standard problem in space. If you have a moving part, you better make it rotary, because if it's moving in another way, chances are it's going to seize up and not work once you're in space.
Forget space. How about my printer? Folks who are listening, I'm sure you can. Is there anybody out there who has not ever had printer problems with things jamming up and parts not moving? I mean, come on.
Yeah, printers are one of the most challenging examples, right? For some reason, that technology has never been like completely smoothed out. So, you know, here, I think the traps that they show are possible, but they're not necessarily realistic in this particular scenario, because they're just so long lasting and design and operate to specifications, even though it's hundreds or even thousands of years later, right? So the other idea part about it is that it's pirates who did this. You know, the Navy has a construction crew known as the Seabees, and they do pretty amazing things. I'm not sure pirates had Seabees. I'm not sure that they're tomb builders among pirate crews, and they would actually expend that much effort to, you know, because this is sometimes you think this is like years of work to create these elaborate tombs with all these different parts. Because if you're going to engineer something like this, you have to prototype it and test it. You don't just build it and it works. You have to go through iterations to get it there.
So you're telling me you don't think that One-Eyed Willie and his gang were, you know, trapped in there just testing all these booby traps? That's not flying for it?
Yeah, they just didn't have time for that. You know, they got to be out here pillaging and raiding, you know, like, you know, this is not what a pirate does. We're not, you know, it's almost like when the Vikings became farmers. You know, they're like, oh, we're going to settle down. Are you still a Viking at that point? You know, if you're building tombs, or is Viking an ethnicity or is it a behavior? Like pirate.
What makes a pirate a pirate?
What makes a pirate, right? You got Somali pirates. You got, you know, your ancient, you know, English, British pirates. You had your Spanish pirates, right? So I think that if you're going on raiding tours, you're a Viking. I don't care where you originate. So here's the dilemma for me. These particular traps and booby traps, they can be made. It's not that they're impossible to construct. The question I have is, in this particular scenario, do they fly? Because they work so well and they're old and they still are staged and ready to be triggered. That is a toughie for me.
Yeah.
The degradation of materials over time, under weathering, under oxidation, under moisture attack, you know, what do I say, Tamara? What is the answer here?
Would it help ease you into the answer you're edging toward if I said, listening to you, it would make sense to me that the traps as presented in the movie no longer fly scientifically based on what you're saying? Would it be easier to agree with me? Would it be easier to agree with me?
That's a way of putting it. You said it. And I'm going to say it like that.
Okay.
The booby traps in the Goonies no longer fly.
I appreciated, though, that you set up the historical context for the fact that
Yeah.
these kinds of booby traps
Right.
are, simpler, but yet, taking some of these elements have existed.
Oh, yeah.
And you said something before that I think is really key to, as we shift into the story piece of Does It
Yes.
Fly, which is you talked about, is it, the reality is no, these materials probably would have degraded over time, but can we look past that? Can we not? And that to me is kind of the central question, right? Like, are we willing to suspend our disbelief? Are we willing to go on the journey that they have set up? Have they given enough richness of story and character and world that we're like, for a minute, we're like, would a rope really have lasted that long in a dense cave? And that to me is the heart of Does It Fly story-wise.
Let me address that with you right now, because there are those types of people, right? Back when people would live tweet movies that were coming out, there were people be like, oh, an explosion in space wouldn't be like that. Oh, this wouldn't be like that. So it's almost like a personality thing, right? It's like, how do you see it? The question of can you suspend disbelief?
I don't think it's just personality, though. I think, yes, for sure. They're the people who are like, their whole purpose is to kind of break something down. And like, we've talked about the fact that on this show, that's actually not what this show is about. Like, our show comes from a fan perspective of, we love these movies. We love talking about this because we like getting into the weeds about whether it's the science and engineering of what we see in the movies or how these gadgets and gizmos are used to help further tell a story. So some of it's personality, but I also do think that when you look at the world building, there does have to be a certain amount of that done, regardless of whether you have the proclivity to break something down and be critical of it or to build something up.
Right.
So what I think for this one is really important, there are a couple things, but one of the big things that I think is important is the context of the movie, of when it came out, right? So this movie came out in 1985, and this is like a classic 1980s kid-centered action adventure movie. A lot of the movies that were released in the 70s, we think of them as serious, as sort of more auteur style movies where you've got the vision.
And they use phrases like jive turkey.
Exactly. But then the 80s came along, and suddenly you had teenagers who were very much taking center stage in the Reagan era. And, you had them consuming pop culture in a different way, and they were the centers of the story. And then you had action adventure stuff, which was happening in a way that hadn't happened before because movie making technology was advancing. And so
the death of the Western. Is that what you're talking about? Because they were all the Westerns in the past. Westerns and epics. Those were the adventure movies.
Yeah. And now you have something different where sometimes technology or ancient archaeology or whatever it might be, so if you think about the movies that came out, also, you can't talk about this without talking about Steven Spielberg. This film was produced by Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, and it was distributed by Warner Brothers. But Spielberg in the 80s, his movies included the Indiana Jones series, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. He was the EP on Back to the Future. He was the EP on Gremlins. And if you go right into the 90s, he also did Hook. So think about all of those films in the context for that. You also had, sort of the nostalgic version of a teen adventure movie. You had Stand By Me in 1986. And then you had sort of the pure comedies, sort of your John Hughes world. You had 16 Candles. You had Ferris Bueller. You had The Breakfast Club. Porky's. So
DC Cab.
So you had a lot, like this whole span of movies that were very kid and teen centric. And this movie really is a reflection of that. So that's context. So number one, you're coming to the movie with that mindset in that era. Then the next piece of it to think about is really sort of all of the classic elements that they put in here, right? Like it's an action adventure. It's a fantasy in a way, right? Like it's action adventure. you're a kid in a boring town where there's not much to do. So what do? You create all kinds of adventures with your friends. You've got adventure, you've got a treasure hunt, you've got pirates, you've got, sort of the tropes of like all the different kinds of kids. You've got your mean teens and your jocks. You have, evil real estate developers. You've got ice cream, you've got Baby Ruths. Like it's all there. And
Oh man.
like
Yeah.
you've got to praise both Richard Donner, the director, and Chris Columbus for this. Chris Columbus wrote this. He later went on to direct Home Alone and also Harry Potter. And
What?
and he said that part of the way that he sort of learned about how to direct kids and films like that was from watching Richard Donner on this set. Richard Donner, like who was Lethal Weapon, Superman. So not necessarily like Spielberg, we often think of him as a director who's great with kids. Richard Donner, not so much, but apparently, according to everything I've read on set, he was amazing with the kids. And one of his big things was really just letting them be who they were, leaning into their personalities. They filmed on location, the majority of it, except for the pirate ship set, which was on stage 16, which is a famous stage. It's got a lot of history. It is one of the biggest stages ever with one of the biggest water tanks available.
Oh.
So the pirate ship, it was not green screen. It was a practical set.
Oh wow. Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
But I want to bring it back around to the traps, right? Because we're not just talking about the movie in general. We're talking about what role do the traps play in the storytelling? Do I suspend my disbelief? Coming at it with like knowing the time period it was set in, looking at this world that they've set up. And what I love is, you mentioned Data's Rube Goldberg machine before. We're not going to talk a lot about that because we might actually talk about Data's inventions in another episode.
Yeah, right. He has his own array
Yeah.
of technologies. Yeah.
But what I will say is by kind of kicking the movie off with that, it sets up this world of invention and excitement and finding the extraordinary in the everyday world, which is what you have. You
Yeah.
have this ordinary group of kids just living their lives and they go out on this extraordinary adventure. And for each booby trap that we experience, each sort of step along the journey, it actually helps us understand these kids better in each role that they play. So, you've got Mikey, who is played by Sean Astin, who I think should go down as like, I don't know, the world's best friend. Like when you think of him in this
Yeah.
movie, when you think of him, in Lord of the Rings,
Look,
like
the best friend has to be a dog. I'm sorry.
I disagree.
Lassie, we got some Ren 1010, we got some options, Benji.
We're gonna agree to disagree on that one. He's sort of your reluctant leader, but he's the one who has the belief. He's got the heart that
Right.
believes that the
Yeah,
treasure of One-Eyed Willie is out there. They're gonna
Yeah.
find it. They're gonna save
Yeah.
their house. They're gonna get through these booby traps. It's all gonna be okay, right? So that's how
So
you.
if the Goonies were the Wu-Tang Clan, he would be Method Man.
Exactly. And then you've got Data, who is played by Ki-Hai Kwan, as we mentioned. For people who weren't familiar with him as a kid actor, you might be more familiar with him from Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I love that movie.
Yeah. So that was his return to the big screen, to the big movie screen after being a kid actor. And, he, as we mentioned, has a bunch of contraptions. He's inventive. He helps them get through the booby traps and saves them from a number of things. So we get a sense of who he is. One of the traps, the bone organ, that's one where we actually get to see Carrie Green, who plays Andy, the cheerleader, who,
Yes.
Mike has a crush on and his older brother actually makes out with, and Mike also makes
What?
out.
That sounds scandalous.
Yeah, another like very, classic trope of like, teen movies, the hot girl, the cheerleader, who's then got her best friend who was played by Martha Plimpton, who's, the sidekick who's kind of sarcastic. But anyway, it turns out she plays piano. So, a big piece of that is her like trying to decipher these very, very old faded musical notes and play the right note to make sure that each piece of the cave that they're standing on doesn't fall away between them, and then the drawbridge eventually lowers. So you get to
As
see
they're being
her.
chased.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you get to see her show off her skills there. So
Yeah.
as we go through this whole thing, we get to see each piece of this. I mean, even like you get Chunk, who's played by Jeff Cohen, who is, sort of, he likes to eat and spew tall tales and,
With a name like Chunk,
that's his nickname. Yep. That's what he's all about in this movie. And then you've got sort of what I guess I'll call, I think it's our final booby trap. One-Eyed Willie, the pirate, the dead pirate, has set up a scale trap where there's if you lift the treasure off of the scale, then it sets off the booby trap. And again, it's another character moment, because when the Goonies finally do find the treasure and they're so excited and they're taking in coins and jewels and things like that, somebody goes to take some of the coins from the scale, and Mikey says,
"That's Willie's. Save that for Willie. Anything else?"
And it's this really lovely moment of a tribute to somebody. And again, it shows that he's the heart of this film. It's why he's the leader. It's why people rally around him. So I feel like the booby traps, well, if you were gonna kind of look hardcore into how do these work, and would the ropes, survive, and would,
Right.
there are wood pieces, they would have decayed, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
The answer, of course, is no. But I, as the viewer, do not care. They have set up. No, I don't. I think
it's too fun. Too fun,
it's
right?
too fun. They've set up this great world. They've set it up
Yeah.
from the beginning that it's an ordinary world that's heightened. And so we buy into it and we go along for the ride, because they've told us
We do.
we're going from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Come on this adventure with me. And that's what the best movie making does. And I think that's why people still love this movie. It constantly appears on top 10 lists for family movies.
No.
If you go.
So let me ask you a question. So, one of the things that I tell people a lot is that, a lot of humor is surprise, and I feel like awe and wonder and, those moments in movies that make you go, like when the floor is falling away at the Oregon scene. And so I just wonder if, it's not just that it's fun. I think ridiculousness heightens the moment sometime, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah,
and I think they do a really good job of balancing the ridiculous with the possible, with the bedrock of story here and the world that they've set up. And that's why I would say the booby traps in the Goonies, they totally fly.
Love it, love it, love it. I will agree with you there. I definitely buy into this story and enjoy it from moment one to the end.
And there's nothing that's so ridiculous that it takes me out of it and knocks me in such a way that I'm along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly. Every moment that has ridiculousness in it is done so well that I feel that it lands the way the creators intended it to land.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how you would, engineer that, right? But I guess the answer is you watch it yourself and see what your own reaction is to it. But I don't know, I write as well, not television shows or movies, but books. And I end up getting to a point where my own writing, I become blind to it in a way, and I have to step away from it. And it's only after being away from it for a while that I can see it again, right? And then I'm like, oh, what was I thinking here? And I can edit it and make progress. But
well, you have to remember, filmmaking is a team sport, right? You've got your writer, you've got your writers, you've got your director, you've got your editor, you've got your musician, you've got an entire crew. And so, every film is not just one person's singular vision, despite the film by credit. It is the contribution of many, many people. And you've got your actors as well. So
just like science.
And there's so many great actors in this. I mentioned Sean Astin, Corey Feldman is in this. We haven't even talked about the Fratelli brothers, who are, the mobsters who were also after the treasure. I mean, Robert Davi, Joe Pantoliano, and then you've got a great performance from Anne Ramsey, who people may remember from Throw Mama from the Train. So you've got a really
Wait, the
fantastic.
Train? I don't know that one.
You don't know Throw Mama from the Train?
No.
Oh, check it out. Check it out. It's
I'll
a
check that out.
very
All right.
sort of silly, grumpy comedy. So speaking of mamas, that actually brings us back around to what we sort of started talking about before, our does it fly for the vibes? So it's one thing to watch this movie while you are a kid or teen
Yeah.
adjacent. It's another thing to come back and watch
Yeah.
it. Here we are, it was 85, 90, to almost, 40 years later, to watch
40
it.
years later. Yeah.
Yeah. So to watch it as an adult,
As an adult
as a parent.
and a parent.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you watch it as a parent, does it still fly, or does it feel like you're watching going, oh my God, I would never let my kids do that?
I am so the opposite. I am true to Gen X. I am like, go out and have adventures, eat the dirt, climb the tree, break a toe. I am not trying to protect you from danger like that. I'm trying to protect you from, other dangers. But the danger of you taking chances and going on adventures, there are, evil people I definitely want to protect you from. And there are evil people here. So
Oh, yeah.
that part, but even that, like I had situations where, we were chased by adults in New Orleans. It was different motivations.
Mhm.
They never caught us.
Mhm.
But, we had those encounters. And I wonder, as you're building a human, building in, one of the things I realized about the difficulty of my own childhood is how much it built in resilience and grit. I'm trained for it, right? I don't feel the pain. Growing up, working on a rural farm, working in forestry, the only way to, where people had zero sympathy for your fatigue, for your, the beast on me, I don't care, load that wood, boy.
Suburban Jersey was a little different. We were not loading wood. But we had
The
sort
wood
of,
truck.
in a
Yeah.
lot of ways we had, a more, I don't know, that like the things when you talk about like there were folks out there chasing you, like for us, it was always the white van, right? So you were walking home
Oh,
from
right.
school and the white van was going to pull up and you were going to get
Yeah.
kidnapped.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Like that is not like when I speak of the evil human,
Yeah.
the other thing there's bullies and there's bullies. There's different levels to it, and so, there's like a level of bullying that breeds resilience and grit. You know how to deal with difficult humans. Then there's where it just goes too damn far. And
Evil
so
people are going to evil.
evil, exactly. Evil is as evil does.
Yeah.
And so, the question is, you take a chance and there's a probabilistic outcome of that chance. And even though the average might be like, oh, you're okay, you come out a stronger person, the catastrophic outcome is still one of the options on the table.
Is part of the way we think about these things based on kind of expectation. So in other words, like back, at the time of Goonies, as you were describing, like kids would go out, you'd go play, whether it was in the neighborhood, at a friend's house, you'd stay at school, whatever. You came back for
In the
dinner
woods.
in the woods.
Yeah.
If you had woods, we had
If you
a
had
little bit of
wood,
woods.
yeah.
There was like a place where you could go biking in the woods and, that's
Right.
what we would do. We would just hop on our bikes and go in there. And you come back for dinner or, or a friend would drop you off from school and that was what it was. And nobody expected to hear from you. So if they didn't, because there was no mechanism. So if they didn't, it wasn't a cause for alarm, as opposed to now when we're in so much more communication with each other, whether it's because like my daughter's, emailing me from school because of whatever, like this thing changed, or, because kids and parents are texting each other or whatever it might be, or even like non-intentional information where your kid's not emailing you directly, but they're at college and you're following their Instagram. So you know what they're up to,
yeah.
right? Or their Snapchat or their TikTok or whatever it might be. So we expect to have a certain amount of knowledge about what's happening with our kids. And if suddenly there were an absence of that, we'd worry.
We would. And, my son, who's 19 now, when he was a teenager and started going on his hanging out with my peers, and it's getting late and that sort of thing, I always text him the 2-word phrase, because literally all I'm looking for is a sign of life.
Right.
So I go, how's life? That's what I text him. How's life?
That brings up, so did you have any kind of curfew or check-in when you were growing up? Like what were your rules?
Don't get nobody pregnant.
Good one.
Don't drink and drive.
Good one.
Don't let your friends drive your car. And the rest of it was kind of like, I have trained you and you have sense. Make good choices and do the right thing. And that was the other element of that was a lot of the dangers that we are concerned with today, they didn't really concern themselves with. It wasn't on their radar, the whole idea of abduction and those sort of things, right? I remember from age 7, it was pretty much get out of the house and come back, before the street lights come on, or come back before it gets dark. But I remember being a kid at 9 years old, and I would go play with my cousins on the other side of our village, I would call it. And, in the summer, it gets dark very late. And, I start walking home at like 11 p.m. If I walk the road, it would take me like an hour. But if I cut through the woods, right, it's considerably shorter. And I would do it.
Yeah.
Try to get me to cut through those woods today at 11 p.m. It's not happening, right? Well, and it's not because I'm afraid of getting abducted or anything. I'm afraid of ghosts. I don't know what the hell is in those woods.
I'm afraid of getting abducted. We did like I mentioned, like kidnapping was a big topic that like where I grew up. Not that it happened, but there were stories. And so that was, it was less about getting abducted in the woods and more just, that kind of a thing. I didn't have a curfew either. My parents had very specific rules. They also said don't get pregnant.
Right.
They also said that. Their rules were whoever was picking me up to go wherever we were going. Cause again, like this was the suburbs. So it was really hard to walk to places. Walking wasn't really much of a possibility based on just distance and stuff. So whoever was picking me up had to come to the door, knock, say hello to my parents, just so that they knew like who I was with. And then if I wasn't going to be home by midnight, I just had to call and basically do like a proof of life call, like, hey, we're at the diner, or hey, we're at so-and-so's house, or we're at the beach, or wherever we might be. And then whenever time I did come home, it didn't matter what time it was, I had to go upstairs, knock on their door and say, Mom, Dad, I'm home. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And they didn't we would often because I was doing a lot of theater and stuff like that. And like during the summer, I did a whole there was like a whole sort of communal summer theater program that we did. So, we'd all have like our summer jobs, and then we'd go to rehearsals at night, and it was kids from like this whole area of Jersey. And then after rehearsal at like 10 or 10:30, we would all head out to the beach. And we'd be on the beach.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, we'd all head out to the beach. And I'd get home at like 3 a.m. and start all over again. They did not care that I got home at 3 a.m. They cared that I knocked on the door and said, I'm home. And the one time I did, and again, keep in mind, this is pre-cell phone. So, or at least pre-everyone having cell phones. So the one time I did not call, my mom knew that I was at the diner. This is Jersey after all. And it was after rehearsal, midnight, 12:30 comes. I forgot to call. I was probably busy like with my cheese fries flirting with someone. And all of a sudden, like my mom stalks into the diner, which was about 10 minutes from the house.
She didn't call the diner. She walks in.
Oh, she walks in and she says, you did not call. We are going home now.
Wow. Well, I guess you learned your lesson.
I did.
That was embarrassing, was it not?
Well,
Yeah.
because honestly, I mean, same thing. Like, even though I wasn't like roaming the woods,
Yeah.
they brought me up to trust me, right? And
Right.
to learn to make good decisions, to know that and they also always said too, like, if you are in a situation that you are uncomfortable in, make up an excuse, call us, we will come get you. We will not get mad or angry because of where you find yourself. You're making the good decision to extract yourself. Let us help you do that. Like, bringing it back to the movie, what's funny about this movie is these kids aren't going off and drinking and smoking and stuff like that. Yeah. They're going off and having life-threatening physical adventures. So they are putting themselves in danger and making maybe some not great choices, but in an entirely different way. And so like I watch now with like my parent hat on, with my adult hat on, and I go, oh my God, who would ever like let their kids roam around and go under a cave and da 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 da.
Well, here's the question. What if it's a group of them? Because that's the thing. It's a group of kids. That changes the formula a little bit.
Right.
There's a little more safety in a group.
Oh, for sure there's more safety. And I definitely feel way safer letting my daughter do things, when she's with a group of people. I mean, it's also, look, we live in LA, which is a city, which is a very different kind of environment to bring your kid up in. And even though it has a very different feel than like a New York or a Chicago, it's still a city. So, you have to kind of like weigh choices, and you have to weigh like also what's their confidence level. I mean, I don't know, maybe if I knew that Data was with her and would be, using his gizmos and gadgets to help her if she needed it. Although she's pretty tough, so, we'll see. But but yeah, so I guess, does it fly to let your kids go off and have these adventures? Do we need like, I don't know.
I don't know. That's yeah. So at the level of what they're doing in this movie, I love the idea of the adventure. I love exploring certain kinds of places. But at the same time, you can't just walk into any cave. You don't know if there's poisonous gases, right? There's a lot of what they do in this movie is a different level beyond the kind of thing that I was doing. At that level, it doesn't fly. No, kid, you can't do that. This is not this is not the path. But at the more innocent level, which I think is a more common experience, it definitely does fly to go on adventures. So where do you draw that line? So the line is the Goonies vibe of kids doing that? No.
I'm with you on that. Like, I love the idea of kids today going off and having adventures. No, I think it's necessary. I think it's kids today. No, I think it's actually
need to put down their phone and climb a tree.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Given the amount of time that like kids spend on screens, whether it's at school, which has more and more screens, whether it's on their phones or their tablets or even playing video games, like whatever it might be, like to me, they need a proportional amount of time doing things out in the world with other kids, with other humans, not through screens, and having that time and space to develop grit and resilience and independence. Do I want it at the level of like, mobsters chasing after you and death-defying booby traps in caves? No. If I was in the context of the 80s where I didn't know they were doing those things,
right?
That's a different story.
When the street lights come on.
Right. But like in the context of, 2025 as a 2025 parent, I would not sanction the adventure.
Not that adventure. So the vibe of the kids going on their near-death adventure does not fly. Thank you so much, Tamara. You are a joy and a breath of fresh air to always chat with in this busy world of hard work and parenting.
I always love hearing about our like very different yet somehow parallel stories of growing up in the places that we grew up, which are so different, and yet we still come to the same parenting conclusion.
Same conclusion, exactly. We got some sense, as they say where I'm from. Hey, thank you all for joining us as well. We are always happy to geek out with you. And I'm happy you're here listening to us go through these amazing movies and television shows and series that we all grew up on and love so much. So if you want more, where can they find us, ma'am?
You can find us at doesitflypod.com. And I have to give a shout out to our producers who always have great links and references to some of the things that we talk about. I'm guessing for sure that they're going to throw up some links to some of the cool actual booby traps that Hakeem mentioned earlier, maybe some of the behind the scenes stuff that I've talked about a little bit as well. And then of course you can find us at Does It Fly Pod on all of our socials. We are a podcast of Roddenberry Entertainment, so you can find us on their channels. And we hope that we can find you in the comments letting us know what you think of the Goonies. Do you have a favorite booby trap in the film? And of course, if there is a gadget or gizmo you would like us to attack on a next topic, then let us know. We will see you next time.
Peace.